They laughed in my face right in the middle of our church foyer. My mother-in-law loudly declared I was not worthy of attending their exclusive family events, completely forgetting that the very credit cards paying for her country club lifestyle had my name on them. I stayed perfectly quiet until the bank called me. By sunset, every single card was declined, and their smug smiles vanished forever. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their fake high society lives, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you believe in karma. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from right now and what time it is there. It was a crisp Sunday morning. I was 31 years old, working 60 hours a week as a pharmacy manager and standing in the crowded foyer of Grace Fellowship Church. I was holding a heavy glass tray of homemade lemon scones. The foyer was buzzing with the post-service rush. Dozens of people in their Sunday best were drinking coffee and catching up on weekly gossip. Right in the center of the room, demanding everyone's attention, were my mother-in-law, Barbara, and my sister-in-law, Jessica. Jessica was 33 years old, but still operated with the social grace of a high school mean girl. She was in the middle of planning a lavish 10-year vow renewal. She and her husband did not have the money for a massive party, but Barbara was determined to make it the social event of the season. They had booked the Orchid Country Club, the most expensive and exclusive venue in our city. Barbara was holding court. She had a glossy binder open on a cocktail table, showing off imported silk fabric swatches and catering menus to a group of wide-eyed church ladies. I stood on the edge of the circle, balancing my tray of scones, trying to be a supportive family member. I listened as Jessica bragged about the champagne tower and the custom ice sculpture she had ordered. Barbara beamed with pride, soaking up the impressed murmurs from the women around them. I saw a lull in the conversation and decided to ask a simple, practical question. I stepped forward slightly. I smiled and asked Barbara what time Liam and I needed to arrive at the country club for the dress rehearsal on Friday evening. The entire circle went dead silent. Barbara slowly turned her head to look at me. She let her eyes travel from the top of my modest floral dress down to my practical, sensible heels, and then back up to the tray of scones in my hands. A slow, condescending smirk spread across her face. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed in the quiet foyer. "Oh, Hannah," Barbara said, her voice dripping with pity. "You and Liam do not need to worry about the rehearsal. Actually, you do not need to worry about the vow renewal at all. We have decided it is best if you sit this one out." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. I asked her what she meant. I was Liam's wife. We had been married for 4 years. Barbara sighed deeply, looking around at the other church ladies as if I were a difficult child she had to manage. She told me that the Oak Ridge Country Club has a very specific standard of elegance. She said this event is highly curated for close family and important society guests. Then she looked me dead in the eye and delivered the blow. She said my working-class aesthetic simply did not fit the vision for the country club photos. She said I would look incredibly out of place among their distinguished guests, and she wanted Jessica's special day to be absolutely flawless. She called me working class as if it were a disease. I managed a high-volume pharmacy. I had a doctorate degree. I worked incredibly hard for my 6-figure salary. But to Barbara, because I came from a modest background and did not care about designer labels or country club memberships, I was an embarrassment. At least 20 people heard her say it. The church ladies exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. I felt my hands trembling against the glass tray. I turned my head to look at my husband. Liam was standing just 3 feet away holding a paper cup of coffee. He had heard every single word. I waited for him to step in. I waited for him to defend his wife, to tell his mother she was crossing a line, to say that if I was not invited, he was not going either. Liam looked down at his shoes. He took a sip of his coffee. He said absolutely nothing. The silence stretched out thick and suffocating. Barbara turned back to her binder, dismissing me entirely. Jessica giggled behind her hand. I did not scream. I did not drop the tray. I carefully set the lemon scones on the nearest table, turned around, and walked out the heavy wooden doors of the church into the cold parking lot. The car ride home was agonizing. The silence inside the vehicle was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. Liam kept his eyes glued to the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He knew he had failed me, but his cowardice was louder than any apology he could have offered. My chest was tight with a mix of humiliation and pure blinding rage. I needed a distraction to keep myself from screaming at him while he was driving. I pulled my phone out of my purse. I opened my banking app, a mindless habit to ground myself in numbers and logic when my emotions were spinning out of control. The app loaded. I scrolled past my checking account balance and glanced at the recent activity on my personal platinum credit card. My breath caught in my throat. Right at the top of the screen, there was a brand new pending charge. The merchant name read, Elite Floral Designs. The amount was exactly $3,500. I stared at the glowing numbers, my mind racing. I had not bought any flowers. I had been at the pharmacy all week and at church all morning. Then the crushing reality hit me. 3 years ago, Liam's father, Richard, had suffered a minor heart attack. He needed expensive prescription medications and copays that my in-laws claimed they could not afford. Because I was making a fantastic salary as a pharmacy manager, I wanted to be a good, supportive daughter-in-law. I opened a high-limit platinum rewards card in my name and added Barbara as an authorized user. I told her explicitly that the card was only for Richard's medical emergencies and pharmacy runs. I paid the bill in full every single month. But over the last 3 years, the definition of a medical emergency had slowly started to shift. A $50 copay turned into a $200 grocery run because Barbara claimed she needed special organic foods for Richard's diet. Then it became gas for her car to drive to the clinic. Then it became a dinner out because she was too stressed to cook. I had noticed the creep, but I was working so many hours, I barely had time to audit out every transaction. Liam always assured me his parents were just going through a tough time and promised he would talk to them about respecting my generosity. He never did. Now sitting in the passenger seat of our car, having just been publicly humiliated and banned from a family event because I was too working class, I was staring at a $3,500 charge for luxury floral arrangements. My hard-earned money was funding the exact high society event I was banned from attending. I shoved the phone directly into Liam's line of sight. I demanded to know what this was. I demanded to know why his mother just charged $3,500 for flowers on my medical emergency credit card. Liam swerved slightly, startled by my sudden outburst. He glanced at the screen and then quickly looked back at the road. His face flushed bright red. He swallowed hard and told me to calm down. I told him I was not going to calm down. I asked him if he knew about this. Liam gripped the steering wheel tighter. He stammered, saying that Jessica really wanted imported orchids for the centerpieces, and Barbara's credit cards were all maxed out. He said they just needed a small bridge loan until Richard's pension check cleared. I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me. He knew. My husband knew his mother was using my credit card to finance a luxury vow renewal. I raised my voice, the anger finally spilling over. I reminded him that 10 minutes ago, his mother told me I was not worthy of stepping foot inside that country club. I reminded him that she mocked my aesthetic and laughed at me in front of half the congregation. And while she was doing that, she was holding a credit card with my name on it to buy imported orchids. Liam raised his voice back, defending her. He told me I was being completely unreasonable and making a massive deal out of nothing. He said Jessica's 10-year vow renewal was a once-in-a-lifetime milestone and family helps family. He demanded I stop being so petty and just keep the peace for a few more weeks until the party was over. He said I could just stay home and relax while they handled the event, as if locking me out of a family celebration was a favor. He was gaslighting me. He was trying to make me feel crazy for protecting the money I worked 60 hours a week to earn. I looked at the man I had married. I saw a weak, enabling son who would happily drain his wife's bank accounts just to buy his mother's approval. I realized right then that I was entirely alone in this marriage. I was nothing more than an ATM to them, a working-class wallet funding their upper-class delusions. I opened my mouth to tell him I was canceling the card the second we pulled into the driveway. I wanted to tear him apart, but before I could speak a single word, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. The screen flashed bright white. The caller ID displayed an 800 number. Beneath the number, the bold text read, Chase Bank Fraud Prevention Services. I stared at the ringing phone. The timing was too perfect. I did not answer it immediately. I looked out the window at the passing trees, my mind shifting from blind rage to cold, calculating focus. I pressed the accept button and brought the phone to my ear. I stepped out of the passenger seat the second Liam parked our car in the driveway. The tires crunched against the concrete, a harsh and heavy sound that perfectly matched the violent pounding in my chest. Liam did not wait for me. He walked straight up the front steps, unlocked the front door, and disappeared inside our house, clearly eager to escape the suffocating tension he had created during the ride home. I stayed outside. The afternoon sun was warm against my skin, but I felt completely frozen as I pressed the vibrating phone to my ear. A polite, highly professional voice came through the speaker. The woman identified herself as a fraud specialist with Chase Bank. She asked to verify my identity before proceeding with the call. I provided my full name, my billing zip code, and the last 4 digits of my social security number. My voice remained remarkably steady, even though my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone onto the pavement. The representative thanked me for verifying my information. She explained that their automated security system had just flagged a highly unusual transaction attempted on my Platinum Rewards card approximately 15 minutes ago. She asked if I was in a safe place to discuss my account details. I looked around my quiet suburban street. A neighbor was mowing their lawn a few houses down, entirely oblivious to the fact that my life was unraveling. I told the representative I was standing in my own driveway and that she had my absolute full attention. She asked if I had recently authorized a payment in the exact amount of $24,000 to a merchant listed as the Oak Ridge Country Club. My heart stopped beating. The air in my lungs simply vanished. $24,000. That was a quarter of my yearly salary after taxes. That was months of standing on my feet at the pharmacy, dealing with frustrating insurance companies, managing a difficult staff, and working exhausting double shifts until my legs ached. And my mother-in-law had tried to swipe it all away in a single afternoon to pay for a high society party I was explicitly banned from attending. I gripped the phone so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I told the representative that I absolutely did not authorize that charge. I explained that the physical card was in the possession of an authorized user, my mother-in-law, but her spending limit was supposed to be strictly restricted. I told the fraud specialist the card was exclusively meant for pharmacy copays and medical emergencies for my father-in-law. I demanded that the massive charge be declined immediately and the card reported as stolen. What the representative said next made the blood drain entirely from my face. She spoke in a gentle, cautious tone, the kind of voice professionals use when they are delivering terrible news. She told me that the transaction had not been initiated by a physical card swipe at a standard payment terminal. The charge was so astronomically large that it required a manual override from the fraud department. The country club merchant had called the bank directly to authorize the payment. The bank then required the cardholder to verify the massive transaction over the phone. The representative paused, letting the heavy weight of her words settle before she continued. She said a woman claiming to be Hannah had spoken to their authorization department. This woman had confidently verified my home address, my exact date of birth, and my mother's maiden name. But most importantly, this woman had successfully provided my secure 4-digit voice authorization PIN. I felt physically sick. The concrete driveway literally spun beneath my feet. I had to lean my entire body weight against the hood of my car to keep myself from collapsing onto the ground. Barbara had not just swiped a piece of plastic. She had committed deliberate, calculated identity fraud. She had impersonated me over the phone to a federal financial institution, and she had used my highly confidential security PIN to bypass the highest level of fraud protections on my account. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the charge was massive, and she took premeditated criminal steps to force the payment through. I asked the fraud specialist how anyone could have possibly acquired my voice authorization PIN. It was a completely separate security measure, entirely different from my ATM code and completely different from my online banking password. It was a random sequence of numbers I kept safely locked away in a digital vault and never shared with anyone. except for my husband. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. A cold, terrifying clarity washed over me instantly, replacing my panic with pure, unforgiving ice. Liam was the only other living person who had access to our secure digital vault. I specifically remembered giving him the master password 2 years ago when we were setting up our joint life insurance policies. He was the only one who knew that specific 4-digit code. I instructed the representative to freeze the platinum card immediately. I told her to permanently decline the $24,000 charge and block any further transactions from the Oak Ridge Country Club or any related event vendors. She confirmed the card was now locked and offered to mail a replacement to my home address. I told her not to bother sending a new one. I thanked her profusely for her diligence, ended the call, and slid the phone deep into my pocket. I stood alone in the driveway for a very long time. The warm afternoon breeze ruffled the leaves of the large oak tree in our front yard, mocking the absolute devastation happening inside my mind. My mother-in-law had impersonated me to steal thousands of dollars, and the man I had promised to spend the rest of my life with had willingly handed her the weapon to do it. I did not cry. I did not hyperventilate. The loyal betrayed wife, who had spent 4 years desperately trying to earn her in-laws' approval, died right there on the concrete. In her place was a woman who understood exactly what needed to be done next. I pushed myself off the hood of the car, walked up the front steps with heavy, deliberate strides, and opened the front door. Liam was standing in the kitchen. He had taken off his Sunday suit jacket and loosened his expensive silk tie. He was pouring himself a tall glass of iced water from the refrigerator dispenser, acting as though the horrific display of bullying at the church had been nothing more than a minor misunderstanding. He looked over his shoulder as I walked into the room. He offered a weak, apologetic smile, clearly preparing to deliver another patronizing speech about how we all just needed to sacrifice our pride for Jessica's big day. I did not give him the chance to speak a single word. I walked slowly toward the center kitchen island. I kept my voice incredibly calm, completely devoid of any emotion whatsoever. I asked him if he wanted to tell me why his mother just tried to charge $24,000 to my personal credit card. Liam choked violently on his water. He coughed repeatedly, slamming the heavy glass down onto the granite countertop. Water splashed everywhere, soaking a stack of unopened mail, but he ignored it completely. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes darting frantically around the kitchen, looking at the cabinets, the floor, the ceiling, anywhere but at me. He stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher than normal. He claimed there must be some kind of massive clerical error. He said the venue deposit was only supposed to be $10,000, and the remaining amount was probably just a standard security hold for the catering company. He waved his hand dismissively, telling me the country club always places a temporary authorization to secure the calendar date, and the money would safely bounce back into the account by Monday morning. He was lying to my face. He was standing in the kitchen we bought together, looking me right in the eye and trying to feed me a fabricated corporate story to cover up his mother's felony theft. I took another deliberate step closer to him. I did not raise my voice, but my tone was absolute zero. I asked him a very specific question. I asked him how his mother managed to provide my highly secure personal 4-digit voice authorization PIN to the bank representative over the phone. Liam froze completely. The last remaining drops of color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The silence in the kitchen was absolute and deafening. He had not anticipated the bank calling me directly. He had not realized that manually overriding a massive fraud alert would leave an undeniable recorded audit trail. I demanded an answer. I asked him directly if he gave his mother my security PIN. His shoulders slumped forward. The weak, enabling little boy, hiding underneath the grown man's suit, finally revealed himself. He rubbed his temples aggressively and let out a long, frustrated sigh. He did not apologize for the betrayal. He did not look ashamed of his actions. Instead, he immediately got defensive. He told me I was making a massive deal out of a simple logistical issue. He admitted he gave Barbara the PIN, claiming she had called him in an absolute panic from the country club management office. He said the venue coordinator was threatening to cancel Jessica's date and give the ballroom to another couple if they did not put down the full deposit right that exact second. Liam said his mother was crying hysterically on the phone, and he just wanted to fix the problem and make everyone happy. He told me he gave her the security code just to secure the venue temporarily, insisting they were going to sit down and figure out a repayment plan later. He chose them. In the ultimate test of loyalty and partnership, my husband had actively conspired with his toxic family to exploit my financial security. He had taken the most private information I trusted him with and handed it over on a silver platter to a woman who had just publicly humiliated me and banned me from the very event I was secretly paying for. He took a step toward me, telling me to stop looking at him like he had committed a violent crime. He tried to flip the script, calling me selfish. He said we were a family and families share resources when times get tough. He told me I made more than enough money at the pharmacy to cover a temporary deposit. Then, he actually had the nerve to demand I call the bank back immediately and authorize the charge so Jessica would not lose her dream venue. I looked at the man standing across the granite kitchen island. I had spent 4 years building a life with him. I had cooked his meals, supported his career changes, and bailed his parents out of their endless financial mismanagement. I thought we were a team building a future together. But looking at him now, I saw exactly what his family saw when they looked at me: a convenient, easily manipulated source of endless income. I did not scream at him. I did not throw the glass of water across the room. I did not cry a single tear. Screaming would imply that I still cared about saving this broken marriage and that part of my heart was completely dead and gone. I turned around and walked out of the kitchen without a word. Liam called after me, his voice rising in panic and frustration, demanding to know where I was going. He yelled that we needed to call the country club back and resolve the payment issue right now before Barbara suffered a nervous breakdown. I ignored him entirely. I walked straight down the hardwood hallway to my home office. I stepped inside the room, pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me, and turned the brass deadbolt until it clicked firmly into place. I heard Liam's heavy footsteps pause right outside the door. He knocked once, told me to stop acting like an immature child, and finally walked away down the hall. I walked over to my desk and sat down in my leather chair. I reached forward and powered on my desktop computer. The quiet hum of the machine booting up was the only sound in the locked room. I watched the screen flicker to life. My marriage was officially over. My exhausting role as the compliant working-class ATM for a family of snobs was permanently finished. It was time to start digging through our finances, and I was going to unearth every single secret they had been hiding from me. The glow of the computer monitor was the only light in my locked office. I pulled the blinds shut so Liam would not see my shadow from the backyard. The house was entirely silent, save for the muffled sound of a television playing downstairs. He was probably watching sports, completely unbothered by the fact that he had just confessed to handing his mother the keys to my financial ruin. I sat straight in my leather chair and took a deep, slow breath. I was a pharmacy manager. My entire career was built on precision auditing and catching microscopic errors that could cost someone their life. I was going to apply that exact same ruthless scrutiny to my marriage. I opened a secure browser window and logged into the primary joint checking account where both of our salaries were deposited. For 4 years, I had trusted Liam to handle our day-to-day household bills. He was an underwriter, someone whose literal job was assessing financial risk. I thought our money was perfectly safe in his hands. I assumed the massive deposits from my 60-hour work weeks were growing our savings, paying down our mortgage, and securing our future. I requested the transaction history for the past 36 months and downloaded the raw data into a massive spreadsheet. The first few months of data looked entirely normal. There were mortgage payments, utility bills, car insurance premiums, and standard grocery runs. But as I scrolled down to the start of the second year, right around the time I handed Barbara that platinum card for medical emergencies, a strange and disturbing pattern emerged. My paycheck would hit the joint account on the 1st and 15th of every month. Usually within 48 hours, a transfer would initiate. It was never a round number. It would be something like $842 or maybe $1,215. The description always read as a generic external transfer to a routing number I did not recognize. I frowned and leaned closer to the screen. I ran a quick filter on the spreadsheet, isolating every single external transfer to that specific hidden account. My blood ran cold as the rows populated down the screen. There were dozens of them. Every single month, chunks of my salary were being quietly siphoned out of our joint checking and funneled into a black hole. I highlighted the column and hit the sum button. The total was staggering. Over 3 years, Liam had drained tens of thousands of dollars from our shared resources. I needed to know where the money was going. I pulled up the separate banking portal for the platinum credit card I had issued to Barbara. I had always assumed the balance was paid off every month. I rarely checked the statements because Liam assured me he handled it, and the balance always showed as zero when I occasionally glanced at the mobile app on his phone. I downloaded the full document statements directly from the bank servers. The truth was worse than I could have ever imagined. The balance on Barbara's card had not been zero for years. She had been treating my credit line like a limitless luxury allowance. There were massive charges for high-end hair salons, expensive dinners at local steakhouses, boutique clothing stores, and weekend spa retreats. She was living the lifestyle of a wealthy socialite, all funded by the woman she deemed too working class to attend her daughter's vow renewal. But the most damning part was the payment history. The minimum payments and the crushing interest fees were being paid directly from Liam's secret external checking account. He had engineered a complete financial shell game right under my nose. He knew his mother was racking up massive, frivolous debt. Instead of confronting her, instead of protecting his wife, he secretly intercepted my hard-earned paychecks, moved my money into a hidden account, and used my own salary to pay the exorbitant interest rates on his mother's shopping sprees. He did all of this to hide the true extent of her debt from me, deliberately keeping the main balance just low enough to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. He was not just a weak son trying to keep the peace. He was an active, calculating accomplice. He had systematically embezzled my earnings to subsidize his family's delusions of grandeur. I sat back in my chair. The harsh blue light of the monitor reflected in my eyes. The sheer scale of the deception took my breath away. Every time I came home exhausted from a 14-hour shift at the pharmacy, Liam would rub my shoulders and tell me how proud he was of my work ethic. All the while, he was waiting for my paycheck to clear, so he could funnel my money to his mother. They had laughed at me. They had mocked my clothes and my background. They had told me I was not worthy of standing beside them in a country club. And yet, every single luxury they enjoyed was paid for with my sweat. A deep, unfamiliar calm settled over me. There were no tears left to cry. The woman who wanted to fix this marriage was entirely gone. I carefully exported every single bank statement, every hidden transfer, and every fraudulent credit card charge. I compiled them into an encrypted folder on an external hard drive. I was gathering the ammunition required to destroy them completely. Once the digital evidence was safely secured, I quietly powered down the computer. I needed to secure my physical life before Liam realized what was happening. I pulled a small duffel bag from the back of my closet and began moving methodically through the house. I was incredibly quiet, listening to the faint sounds of the football game still playing in the living room downstairs. I opened my filing cabinet and retrieved my birth certificate, my passport, and my social security card. I walked into our bedroom and opened my jewelry box. I took the vintage diamond necklace my grandmother had left me, the only piece of genuine value I owned, and slipped it into a velvet pouch. I packed the external hard drive containing the financial autopsy. I placed everything into the duffel bag and zipped it shut. I walked down the stairs, carrying the bag casually over my shoulder. Liam called out from the living room couch, asking if I was going somewhere. I kept my voice perfectly flat and told him I needed to run to the pharmacy to check on a delayed inventory shipment. He did not look away from the television screen. He just grunted an acknowledgement and told me to pick up some takeout on the way home. I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove away from the life I had built. I did not go to the pharmacy. I drove straight to a different bank, one completely unaffiliated with any of the accounts Liam and I shared. I walked into the quiet lobby and requested to open a private safety deposit box. The teller guided me to the vault. I placed my passport, my birth certificate, my grandmother's necklace, and the external hard drive into the metal box. I locked it, slid the silver key onto my keyring, and felt the first tiny fraction of safety return to my life. They could not touch my identity, and they could not destroy the evidence. I returned to my car and sat in the parking lot. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pavement. I pulled out my phone and searched for the most aggressive, highly rated divorce and financial fraud attorney in the city. I found a woman named Victoria Sterling. Her reviews described her as utterly ruthless and coldly efficient. She was exactly what I needed. I dialed her office number and paid a massive premium to speak with her on an emergency weekend consultation line. Victoria answered the phone with a crisp, authoritative tone. I did not waste her time with tears or emotional backstory. I gave her the cold, hard facts. I told her about the vow renewal, the unauthorized $24,000 charge, the voice authorization PIN, the secret checking account, and the 3 years of systematic embezzlement. I told her I wanted to cancel every single card, empty the joint accounts, and serve him with divorce papers tonight. Victoria stopped me immediately. Her voice was sharp and commanding. She told me that acting on raw emotion right now would be a catastrophic legal mistake. She explained that if I canceled the authorized user card and locked the joint accounts tonight, Liam would be notified instantly. He and his family would immediately realize that I knew everything. Panic makes desperate people dangerous. Victoria warned me that if I cut off their funding supply abruptly before the vow renewal, they would scramble to secure the money by any means necessary. Because they already had my social security number, my date of birth, and my mother's maiden name, they could easily open brand new lines of credit in my name before I had the chance to properly freeze everything. They could take out massive personal loans or drain our home equity. She told me I needed to build an airtight, undeniable criminal case. I needed to trap them. Victoria laid out a very specific, incredibly difficult strategy. She told me I had to go back to that house and play the role of the meek, submissive, apologizing wife. I had to swallow my pride and pretend that Liam had successfully gaslit me into submission. I had to make them feel entirely safe, completely victorious, and overwhelmingly arrogant. She said arrogant people make careless, easily prosecutable mistakes. She instructed me to tell Liam that I was sorry for overreacting. She told me to promise him that I would not interfere with Jessica's vow renewal, and that I would happily stay home to keep the peace. By giving them a false sense of security, I would ensure they proceeded with their lavish plans, fully believing my credit card was still at their disposal. Victoria told me to monitor my credit report every single hour. She predicted that because the $24,000 charge had failed, they would become desperate to pay the country club vendors. That desperation would force them to cross the line from standard financial abuse into blatant, undeniable federal identity theft. When they finally made their fatal move, we would drop the hammer. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The thought of walking back into that house and apologizing to the man who had robbed me made my stomach churn. It felt like swallowing broken glass. But as I looked at the bank building where my true identity was safely locked away, I knew Victoria was absolutely right. A quick explosion would give them room to negotiate. A slow, calculated trap would destroy them completely. I thanked Victoria, retained her services with a massive deposit, and ended the call. I took a deep breath, put the car in drive, and headed back to the house to play the role of a lifetime. I carried the greasy paper bag of Chinese takeout through my front door, my jaw clenched so tightly my back teeth ached. Liam was still lounging on the living room sofa, mindlessly scrolling through his phone, as if the complete destruction of our marriage had not just occurred in the kitchen. I had to channel every single ounce of professional discipline I had ever learned managing hostile patients at the pharmacy. I took a slow, deep breath, intentionally letting my shoulders slump forward to mimic absolute defeat, and walked into the room. I handed him the plastic bag of food and forced my voice to tremble just slightly. I looked down at the floor and told him I was incredibly sorry. I said I had completely overreacted about the credit card charge and the country club venue. I fed him the exact compliant narrative I knew his fragile ego desperately wanted to hear. I told him the operational stress at the pharmacy had been overwhelming this month, and I had unfairly taken my exhaustion out on him and his mother. I promised him I would stay entirely out of the way. I agreed to stay home during all the vow renewal events and let Jessica have her flawless high society weekend without my working class aesthetic ruining their pristine family photographs. Liam took the bait instantly. The profound relief that washed over his face was genuinely nauseating. He did not ask how I was feeling emotionally. He did not offer a single word of apology for his mother's cruelty at the church or his own financial betrayal. He just smiled a wide, arrogant smile, patted my arm as if I were a successfully disciplined pet, and told me he was glad I was finally seeing reason. He eagerly grabbed his garment bag containing his expensive tuxedo, kissed my cheek with cold, unfamiliar lips, and hurried out the front door to attend the lavish rehearsal dinner. The very moment the taillights of his car disappeared down the street, my compliant mask completely dropped. I engaged the deadbolt on the front door and sank onto the living room sofa. The house was entirely silent, but my mind was screaming with calculated focus. I placed my smartphone on the glass coffee table and logged directly into my credit card monitoring application. Victoria. My ruthless new divorce and fraud attorney had specifically advised me to leave the secondary authorized user card active with a minor available balance. She told me it was vital to track their real-time movements and keep them feeling absolutely confident that the Bank of Hannah was still open for business. The rehearsal dinner was currently taking place at a high-end exclusive steakhouse downtown. I sat alone in the dim light of my living room, swiping down to refresh the digital transaction page every 10 minutes. It felt exactly like watching a slow-motion car crash from a safe distance. At 7:30 in the evening, a pending charge suddenly appeared for $800. At 8:15, a second massive charge populated for $450 at the restaurant bar. I watched the numbers materialize on my screen. They were ordering premium imported steaks, excessively expensive bottles of vintage wine, and top-tier artisan cocktails. They were laughing and toasting to their elevated social status, all while mocking the stupid, compliant wife they had left sitting at home. The psychological toll of sitting on that sofa, doing absolutely nothing, was suffocating. Every single fiber of my being wanted to hit the bright red lock account button on my screen. I wanted nothing more than to imagine the arrogant steakhouse waiter walking back to their private dining room and loudly announcing that the card was declined right in front of the groom's wealthy Silicon Valley relatives. My chest burned with the unfairness of it all. I gripped the hard edges of my phone until my fingers physically ached, but I had to repeatedly remind myself of Victoria's harsh legal warning. Arrogance always leads to fatal mistakes. If I shut off the money supply right now, they would simply invent a clever excuse to the restaurant manager and find another way to survive the weekend. I needed them to feel completely invincible. I needed them to enthusiastically max out that remaining credit limit tonight so they would hit a catastrophic brick wall tomorrow morning. By 10 o'clock, the total steakhouse bill had reached nearly $3,000, practically wiping out the entire remaining available credit on that specific authorized line. I watched the final transaction post to the ledger, my heart pounding with a highly toxic mix of disgust and pure anticipation. They were celebrating their fake wealth on my dime, completely unaware that they were actually celebrating the absolute end of their financial lifeline. The trap was holding perfectly. Now I just had to wait for them to get desperate. Around 11:30 that night, Bright halogen headlights swept rapidly across my living room wall. I peeked through the horizontal window blinds. It was Barbara's pristine white luxury sport utility vehicle pulling aggressively into my driveway. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed down the fabric of my oversized gray sweatpants, and pulled open the front door before they could even ring the doorbell. Barbara and Jessica stood together on my front porch, smelling strongly of expensive steakhouse wine and heavy designer perfume. Jessica was wearing a stunning custom-tailored cocktail dress, her hair perfectly styled by a professional salon. Barbara was draped in an elegant silk wrap, tightly clutching a famous designer handbag. They looked me up and down with open disdain, their eyes lingering heavily on my baggy sweatshirt and bare feet. Barbara offered a tight, completely artificial smile. She stated they just needed to pick up Liam's heavy golf clubs for the exclusive groomsmen outing scheduled for tomorrow morning. She did not offer a single word of thanks for me staying home or funding their lavish dinner. Instead, she let out a short, condescending little laugh. She told me it was definitely for the best that I had chosen to stay behind, adding maliciously that sweatpants were clearly my natural element. Jessica giggled loudly behind her manicured hand, leaning against the porch railing, looking at me exactly like I was the hired domestic help. I retreated into the house, retrieved the heavy leather golf bag from the hall closet, and carried it out to them. I set it down gently on the wooden porch and offered a blank, polite smile. I asked them in a soft voice if they had enjoyed the rehearsal dinner. Barbara waved her hand dismissively, stating the food was merely adequate, but the downtown venue was spectacular. Then her artificial smile abruptly faded, quickly replaced by the demanding, highly entitled expression I knew all too well. She took a deliberate step closer to me. The sharp smell of gin mixed with her perfume was overwhelming in the cool night air. She lowered her voice and got straight to the point. She told me there was a minor logistical hiccup with the country club caterer. Apparently, the high-strung event manager needed an additional $10,000 cleared by tomorrow morning to finalize the premium seafood menu. Barbara casually instructed me to log into my mobile banking application right then and there to request a temporary credit limit increase on her authorized card. She spoke to me not as a loving mother-in-law, but as a superior, giving a direct order to a subordinate employee. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. This was the exact moment Victoria had predicted. The massive $24,000 charge had failed earlier that afternoon, and now the vendors were actively demanding their money. The luxurious walls were finally closing in on them. I looked Barbara directly in her cold eyes. I kept my voice incredibly soft and remarkably polite. I told her I was terribly sorry, but the bank would absolutely not allow me to raise the credit limit any higher. I explained that with the recent floral charges and the massive steakhouse bill they had just racked up tonight, my credit utilization was simply maxed out for that specific account. I offered a helpless, apologetic shrug, perfectly playing the role of the powerless, defeated cash machine. Barbara's face instantly twisted into an ugly, furious sneer. The flawless mask of high society elegance completely shattered on my front porch. She took another aggressive step forward, completely invading my personal space. She pointed a sharp, manicured finger directly at my chest. She told me I was being purposely difficult and entirely unreasonable. She demanded I call the fraud department immediately and forced the limit increase through aggressively claiming my six-figure pharmacy salary was more than enough collateral for the bank to approve it. When I firmly and politely repeated that it was financially impossible, the sheer venom that pooled in her eyes was terrifying. Barbara leaned in so close I could feel the heat of her breath. Her voice dropped to a vicious, venomous whisper. She told me I was a selfish, ungrateful little girl who was incredibly lucky Liam had ever looked twice at me. She promised me that if I ruined Jessica's perfect society weekend over a few $1,000s, she would make absolutely sure Liam completely turned his back on me forever. She threatened to make my life in this family a living hell, claiming she could easily convince her son to file for divorce by Monday morning if she truly wanted to. I did not flinch. I absorbed every single vicious threat, quietly filing them away in my memory to share with my attorney. I offered one last submissive smile, told them to have a wonderful and blessed vow renewal, and firmly closed the heavy front door right in their furious faces. I locked the deadbolt and leaned my back against the solid wood. I could hear Barbara cursing loudly and uncharacteristically on the porch as she and Jessica angrily dragged the heavy golf clubs down the steps to their luxury vehicle. They were absolutely furious, but more importantly, they were entirely desperate. The strict catering deadline was looming. The country club vendors were aggressively demanding payment, and their primary reliable funding source had just politely shut them down for the night. They had no liquid money of their own. They had an incredibly expensive, exclusive country club, threatening to cancel their massive society event in less than 24 hours. They were backed completely into a dark corner, fueled entirely by their own arrogance and blind escalating panic. As I listened to their heavy tires screech out of my driveway, a cold, triumphant thrill washed over my entire body. Victoria was absolutely right. Utter panic makes entitled people do incredibly stupid, reckless things. I walked upstairs to finally get some sleep, knowing exactly what kind of monumental crime tomorrow morning would bring. The fluorescent lights of the retail pharmacy buzzed with a dull, relentless hum that usually gave me a headache by noon. It was Friday morning, the exact day of Jessica's highly curated vow renewal at the Oak Ridge Country Club. While my in-laws were likely waking up in their luxury hotel suites, ordering expensive room service and sipping mimosas, I was standing behind a raised counter, verifying blood pressure medications and managing a line of 12 frustrated patients. I was operating on less than 3 hours of sleep. My mind was entirely consumed by the financial trap I had set the night before, but my professional training kept my hands steady as I counted pills and checked prescription labels. The morning rush was completely chaotic. The phone lines were ringing off the hook, and my pharmacy technicians were rushing back and forth between the drive-through window and the consultation desk. I was in the middle of authorizing a complex insurance override for a regular patient when my personal cell phone vibrated violently inside my white lab coat pocket. It was not a standard text message notification. It was a long, continuous pulse followed by 3 short bursts. I recognized that specific vibration pattern immediately. Years ago, when I first started building my credit to buy a house, I had set up a premium identity protection service. I configured the application to send a critical push notification only for severe security events, like a new loan application or a hard credit inquiry. My heart slammed against my ribs. I excused myself from the consultation window, asking my lead technician to cover the register for 5 minutes. I walked quickly into the private manager's office at the back of the pharmacy and closed the heavy door, shutting out the noise of the retail floor. I pulled the phone from my pocket with trembling fingers. The screen was illuminated with a bright red warning banner from my credit monitoring application. The alert stated that a hard credit inquiry had just been successfully posted to my primary Equifax file. I unlocked the device and opened the secure portal. My eyes scanned the detailed report, and the sheer audacity of what I was reading literally took my breath away. Exactly 20 minutes ago, a formal application had been submitted to a major national bank for their highest-tier premium rewards credit card. It was the kind of exclusive card that required an immaculate credit score and carried an immediate digital approval feature, meaning the applicant would be instantly granted a virtual card number to use on their smartphone while waiting for the physical plastic to arrive in the mail. The application had requested a starting credit limit of $30,000, and the application had been fully approved. I stared at the glowing screen, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic reality of what had just occurred. Barbara and Richard had not just overstepped a boundary. They had not just acted entitled or financially abusive. They had crossed a massive permanent line into federal criminal territory. I leaned my back against the cold cinder block wall of the office, piecing the timeline together in my head. Last night on my front porch, I had politely and firmly refused to raise the credit limit to pay their desperate caterer. I had shut the door in their faces, leaving them utterly stranded. They needed $10,000 by this morning, or the country club would cancel the entire high society weekend. They were humiliated, angry, and backed into a desperate corner. They must have returned to my house after I went upstairs to sleep. Liam was still awake downstairs, wallowing in his own cowardly decisions. They needed a massive amount of money instantly, and they had absolutely zero credit of their own left to leverage. In order to apply for a premium credit card online and receive instant digital approval, you need far more than just a person's name and address. You need their precise annual income, their exact date of birth, and their full 9-digit social security number. There was only one place in the entire world where my social security card and tax returns were physically kept. They were secured inside a locked metal filing cabinet in Liam's home office, a cabinet that Liam had the key to. A wave of profound, absolute disgust washed over me. My husband, the man who had promised to protect and cherish me, had watched his parents panic over a catering bill and willfully handed over my most secure government documents. He had given his mother my social security number so she could illegally open a massive line of credit in my name to fund his sister's fake luxury lifestyle. They actually believed I would be too meek to check my credit report, too intimidated by their social standing to report them, and too invested in my marriage to send my husband's parents to prison. They thought I was a compliant fool. They had absolutely no idea they had just handed me the exact legal noose I needed to destroy them all. I looked at the clock on the office wall. It was 11 in the morning. The vow renewal ceremony was scheduled to begin at 4 in the afternoon, with the lavish reception immediately following. The vendors at the country club would be aggressively demanding their final payments right now as they set up the ballroom. I walked out of the manager's office, informed my staff that I was taking an early emergency lunch break, and walked straight out the back door of the pharmacy. The midday sun was beating down on the asphalt parking lot. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car, started the engine to get the air conditioning running, and locked all 4 doors. The confined space of the vehicle felt like a war room. I pulled out a small notepad from my center console and a black pen. It was time to execute the legal strategy my attorney Victoria had prepared me for. My first phone call was to the 3 major credit bureaus. I moved with cold, calculated efficiency, navigating the automated menus and speaking to the fraud representatives. Within 15 minutes, I had placed a permanent security freeze on my Experian Equifax and TransUnion files. No one on earth would be able to open another account in my name without a direct telephone verification and a complex password that only I knew. The financial bleeding was officially stopped. My second call was to the Fraud Investigation Department of the National Bank that had just issued the fraudulent premium card. I provided my verified identity and explained that I had just received an alert for an account I absolutely did not open. The representative was incredibly helpful and immediately flagged the brand new account as highly suspicious. I told the bank representative that I was currently filling out a formal police report and desperately needed the exact digital footprints associated with the application to provide to the authorities. Because the account was legally in my name, the representative was obligated to share the information with me. She read the details aloud, and I wrote them down on my notepad. The application had been submitted using a generic email address that closely resembled Jessica's middle name and birth year. But the most damning piece of evidence was the IP address used to submit the digital form. I recognized the internet service provider details immediately. The application had been pushed through using the wireless internet network registered directly to my in-laws' residential address. They had committed federal identity theft from the comfort of their own living room sofa. I thanked the bank representative and instructed her to leave the digital card number active, but to route any attempted transactions directly to the fraud monitoring desk for immediate decline. I needed the card to be alive just long enough for Barbara to try and use it. My third and final phone call was to the non-emergency line of our local city police department. I explained the situation clearly and concisely, stating that I was the victim of a massive identity theft currently in progress involving tens of thousands of dollars. Given the sheer monetary value of the fraud and the digital evidence I had already collected, the dispatcher immediately transferred my call to a detective in the Financial Crimes Division. A man named Detective Miller answered the phone. His voice was gruff, serious, and highly attentive. I did not waste his time with emotional family drama. I gave him a pure clinical rundown of the facts. I provided my name, my social security number, the fraudulent bank application details, the specific email address used, and the exact IP address that tied the crime directly to Richard and Barbara's home network. I explained that the perpetrators were my parents-in-law and that they had stolen my identity to pay for a lavish event happening at the Orchid Country Club today. I told him they were currently in possession of a digitally approved card number with a $30,000 limit, and they were fully intending to hand that stolen number to the country club management this afternoon to settle a massive catering and venue balance. Detective Miller stopped typing on his keyboard. He asked me a very specific legal question confirming that I had absolutely not given them verbal or written permission to use my social security number for this application. I stated clearly and firmly for the recorded line that I had not. The detective let out a low whistle. He told me I had handed him a perfectly wrapped case of felony wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, but then his tone shifted into a serious strategic command. He told me to hold entirely tight and do absolutely nothing to alert my family. He explained the nuances of the law. Right now, they had submitted a fraudulent application, which was certainly a crime. But to guarantee a slam-dunk prosecution with maximum legal consequences, the police needed them to actually attempt to process a massive financial transaction using the stolen funds. If I called Barbara right now and confronted her, she would simply delete the email, claim her computer was hacked, and deny everything. The detective told me the trap was set, but we needed them to willingly step inside and pull the trigger. He instructed me to let them walk into the Orchid Country Club, feeling like they had gotten away with the perfect crime. He needed them to stand in the lobby, look the country club manager in the eye, and hand over a stolen digital credit card number to pay for their luxury party. The moment that stolen card was run through the merchant terminal, the crime of felony fraud would be completely irreversible and fully documented by the country club's financial system. Detective Miller asked me for the exact address of the country club and the specific start time of the event. I gave him the details, feeling a strange, powerful sense of calm wash over my entire body. He told me he was dispatching 2 financial crime officers to the venue to coordinate directly with the country club management. They were going to be waiting in the wings the moment Barbara tried to settle her bill. I ended the phone call and sat in the quiet isolation of my car. The oppressive midday heat was beating against the windshield, but I felt completely chilled. My husband had betrayed me. My in-laws had stolen my identity. They had treated me like garbage, thinking I would just quietly sweep up their messes and fund their vanity for the rest of my life. I looked at the notes written on my dashboard pad. The evidence was secured, the credit was frozen, the police were mobilized. I put the car in gear and drove back toward the pharmacy to finish my shift. I had a few hours left to pack my bags and prepare my final goodbye before the most explosive wedding reception in the history of our church officially began. The sound of running water echoed through the master bathroom. Steam billowed from beneath the heavy wooden door, carrying the faint scent of Liam's expensive cedar and bergamot body wash. It was Saturday morning, the official day of Jessica's grand vow renewal. My husband was standing under a hot shower, humming a cheerful tune, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire life was about to be dismantled piece by piece. I stood in the center of our bedroom with a sleek black suitcase open on the mattress. I moved with total silence and absolute precision. I was not packing everything I owned. I was only packing the essentials that I would need for the next few weeks. The practical blouses, the sensible shoes, the comfortable sweaters my mother-in-law loved to mock. Everything else could be dealt with later by the moving company my attorney Victoria had already placed on standby. I folded a pair of slacks and tucked them neatly into the corner of the suitcase. There were no tears blurring my vision. The devastating heartbreak I had experienced just a few days ago had entirely crystallized into a profound, chilling sense of purpose. I was executing a carefully constructed legal strategy. I zipped the suitcase shut, lifted it off the mattress, and carried it silently down the hallway. I placed it near the garage door alongside my other bags, ready to be loaded into my car the moment the house was empty. I walked back up the carpeted stairs and returned to the master bedroom. It was time to leave my parting gift. I walked over to the large mahogany dresser and retrieved a pristine silver gift box. It was a beautiful, thick cardboard box lined with velvet that Liam had given me for our second anniversary. He had used it to present me with a pair of pearl earrings. Today, I was repurposing it to deliver something infinitely more valuable. My absolute freedom. I placed the silver box perfectly in the center of Liam's pillow. I lifted the lid and carefully arranged the contents inside. The first item was a thick stack of legal documents printed on crisp, high-quality paper. Victoria had worked late into the evening to expedite the filing. They were formal divorce petitions. The top page boldly displayed my name as the petitioner and Liam's name as the respondent. I had already signed my portion on the signature line in smooth blue ink. Beneath the divorce papers lay the financial autopsy I had meticulously conducted in my locked office. I had printed out the massive spreadsheet detailing every single unauthorized transfer Liam had made over the past 3 years. I used a bright yellow highlighter to mark the specific dates where my hard-earned salary was siphoned out of our joint account and funneled into his hidden checking account. I highlighted the matching dates where he used my stolen money to pay the exorbitant interest fees on Barbara's luxury credit card debt. The numbers told a story of absolute betrayal, and the bright yellow ink made it impossible for him to deny or explain away. The final document at the very bottom of the box was the most devastating. It was a certified copy of the formal police report I had filed with the Financial Crimes Division just 24 hours ago. The report clearly outlined the felony identity theft committed by his parents. I took a red pen and circled the specific section of the report that documented the Internet Protocol address used to submit the fraudulent credit card application. I wanted Liam to look at those numbers and realize that the federal authorities already possessed undeniable digital proof that the crime was committed from his parents' living room. I placed the lid back onto the silver box. I tied a smooth satin ribbon around the center, finishing it with a perfect, elegant bow. It looked exactly like a thoughtful present from a loving wife. The water in the bathroom suddenly shut off. I quickly stepped away from the bed and walked over to my vanity mirror, pretending to apply a coat of light moisturizer. Liam opened the bathroom door wrapped in a plush white towel. His hair was damp and his face was freshly shaved. He walked over to his closet and pulled out the protective garment bag containing his custom-tailored tuxedo. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. He truly believed he had successfully managed his difficult wife and secured his family's perfect weekend. He caught my eye in the mirror reflection and offered a relaxed, patronizing smile. He told me I was doing the right thing by staying home today. He said it took a lot of maturity to step back and let his sister have the spotlight without causing any unnecessary family drama. He promised to bring me back a piece of the expensive wedding cake, speaking to me as if I were a grounded child being rewarded for good behavior. I turned around to face him. I kept my expression perfectly smooth and offered him a warm, compliant smile. I told him I hoped the ceremony was exactly what his family deserved. Liam nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the loaded meaning behind my words. He quickly dressed in his formal wear, adjusting his silk bow tie in the mirror and checking his watch. He grabbed his keys from the dresser, completely ignoring the silver gift box resting quietly on his pillow. He told me he was running late for the groomsmen photographs on the golf course and promised to text me later. He walked out of their bedroom, his heavy footsteps retreating down the stairs. The front door opened and closed. I walked over to the bedroom window and looked through the blinds. I watched Liam stride confidently across the driveway and climb into his vehicle. He backed out into the street and drove away, disappearing around the corner on his way to the Oak Ridge Country Club. The moment his car was entirely out of sight, the silent, compliant wife completely vanished. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and walked downstairs to the kitchen counter. The house was mine now, completely empty and entirely quiet. I opened my digital notepad, where I had stored all the direct phone numbers for the banking executives and fraud specialists I had spoken with earlier in the week. The trap was fully loaded. It was time to cut the lifeline. I dialed the primary number for my major banking institution. I navigated the automated menus and immediately requested to speak with the senior account manager assigned to my profile. Once the representative verified my identity, I gave my first explicit directive. I ordered the bank to permanently cancel the Platinum Rewards credit card. I told them to instantly revoke the authorized user privileges assigned to Barbara. I made sure to clearly state that the card was not merely misplaced, but that the authorized user had severely violated the terms of the agreement. The representative confirmed that the card was officially deactivated. Any future attempts to swipe the plastic would result in a hard decline code. Barbara's magical, limitless wallet was officially closed forever. My next step was to secure the actual cash. I instructed the representative to place an immediate hard administrative lock on our primary joint checking and savings accounts. Victoria had advised me not to drain the accounts entirely, as that could cause unnecessary complications during the divorce discovery phase. Instead, freezing the accounts ensured that neither Liam nor his parents could access a single penny of the funds while the legal process unfolded. The bank representative confirmed the freeze was active. Liam's debit card was now just a useless piece of plastic. The final piece of financial housekeeping was the most important. I requested to speak directly with the fraud department regarding the massive $24,000 charge that had been attempted yesterday afternoon. I spoke to the same specialist who had initially flagged the transaction. I confirmed that I had filed a formal police report regarding the identity theft and the unauthorized use of my voice authorization PIN. I officially demanded that the massive country club charge be marked as fraudulent and permanently wiped from my financial ledger. The specialist assured me that my liability was zero and that the merchant would receive a formal chargeback notification shortly. I ended the phone call and set the device down on the cold granite countertop. The entire process had taken less than 20 minutes. In that short window of time, I had completely dismantled the financial infrastructure that sustained my in-laws' arrogant lifestyle. They had absolutely nothing left. I walked to the garage, loaded my packed bags into the trunk of my car, and climbed into the driver's seat. I pulled out of the driveway and navigated through my quiet suburban neighborhood, steering my vehicle toward the wealthy manicured district where the Oak Ridge Country Club was located. I was not driving there to cause a scene. I was not going to crash the vow renewal or scream at them in front of their guests. I was going there to watch the inevitable catastrophic collapse from the front row. The drive took 30 minutes. The scenery gradually shifted from modest family homes to sprawling gated estates with massive circular driveways. I turned onto the private tree-lined road that led directly to the country club entrance. The pristine green lawns of the golf course stretched out endlessly on either side. I bypassed the crowded valet station, driving around to the secondary overflow parking lot used by the event staff. I parked my car under the shade of a large willow tree, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the warm afternoon air. I walked toward the massive grand entrance of the main clubhouse. The building was a stunning display of wealth, featuring towering white columns, expansive glass doors, and a luxurious wraparound patio overlooking the 18th hole. I climbed the stone steps and pulled open the heavy brass handle. The lobby of the Oak Ridge Country Club was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. The floors were polished marble, and the air smelled faintly of expensive floral arrangements and roasted espresso. To my left, a set of massive double doors led into the grand ballroom, where Jessica's reception was scheduled to take place. I did not walk toward the ballroom. Instead, I moved quietly to the right side of the lobby, where a plush, comfortable seating area was arranged near a massive stone fireplace. I selected a high-back leather chair that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the main reception desk, the ballroom doors, and the primary corridor. I sat down, crossed my legs, and signaled a passing club attendant to order a simple black coffee. The lobby was relatively quiet, occupied only by a few wealthy members reading newspapers and event staff rushing back and forth with clipboards. I checked the time on my phone. The vow renewal ceremony was concluding out on the garden terrace, and the cocktail hour was scheduled to begin inside the ballroom very shortly. The vendors would be completing their final setups, and the country club management would be systematically running the final payment authorizations to close out the event ledgers. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee. The bitter dark roast tasted incredible. I leaned back against the smooth leather of the chair, blending perfectly into the background of the opulent lobby. I was entirely invisible, just an ordinary woman enjoying a quiet afternoon. I kept my eyes locked on the grand ballroom doors. The financial fuse had been lit. The police were waiting for their signal, and the explosion was only minutes away. The ambient noise of the Oak Ridge Country Club lobby was a carefully orchestrated symphony of wealth. Soft classical music floated down from hidden ceiling speakers, mingling with the muted clinking of crystal and the low, refined murmurs of passing members. I sat perfectly still in my high-backed leather chair, my hands wrapped around a porcelain mug of black coffee. The dark roast had long since gone cold, but I did not care. I was not there for the refreshments. I was there for the reckoning. Directly across the polished marble floor stood the grand double doors leading into the main ballroom. The heavy wooden doors had been propped wide open to allow the guests to flow freely between the cocktail reception and the garden terrace. From my strategic vantage point in the shadows of the lobby fireplace, I had an entirely unobstructed view of the lavish spectacle unfolding inside. Jessica had spared absolutely no expense for her 10-year vow renewal, primarily because she believed she was spending my money. The ballroom was an explosion of sheer, arrogant opulence. Towering centerpieces of imported white orchids rested on every table, their delicate petals practically dripping with the thousands of dollars my mother-in-law had fraudulently charged to my account. A massive, intricately carved ice sculpture of two intertwining swans slowly melted near the main entrance, catching the light from the massive crystal chandeliers overhead. 150 guests milled around the grand space. I recognized dozens of faces from our church congregation, the exact same women who had stood in the foyer on Sunday morning and watched Barbara humiliate me. They were dressed in expensive evening gowns and tailored suits, sipping premium champagne from tall, elegant flutes. They looked around the room with wide, envious eyes, openly marveling at the sheer scale of the event. Right in the center of the room, holding court like royalty, was Barbara. She was wearing a floor-length silver gown that caught the light with every movement. She had a glass of sparkling wine in one hand and was using the other to gesture dramatically as she told a story to a captivated audience of local socialites. Her face was flushed with the intoxicating thrill of absolute social triumph. She was playing the role of the wealthy, sophisticated matriarch flawlessly. She looked incredibly happy, entirely convinced that her criminal actions from the night before had secured her position at the top of the social ladder. I took a slow sip of my cold coffee and watched her perform. The sheer audacity of her joy was almost mesmerizing. She had stolen my identity, committed felony wire fraud, and treated me like disposable trash, all so she could stand in that room and pretend to be someone she was not. My eyes shifted from Barbara to the far corner of the ballroom. Moving purposefully through the crowd of laughing guests was the lead wedding coordinator. She was an impeccably dressed woman in a sharp black blazer, holding a clipboard in one hand and a sleek wireless credit card terminal in the other. The coordinator was not smiling. Her expression was tight-focused and purely transactional. I knew exactly what she was doing. Country clubs and high-end event venues operate on strict, unforgiving financial schedules. Before the main dinner service could begin, before the premium open bar could continue flowing, and before the band could play their first note, the final balances had to be settled and authorized. The $24,000 deposit that had failed yesterday needed to be accounted for, plus the remaining thousands for the catering upgrades Barbara had frantically demanded on my front porch. I watched the coordinator navigate around a group of laughing groomsmen. She moved with the predatory focus of a collector coming to settle a debt. She cut through the sea of expensive dresses and tailored suits, her eyes locked directly on the silver gown of my mother-in-law. Every second stretched out heavy with anticipation. The moment was approaching with the slow, terrifying inevitability of an avalanche. I pressed my back firmly against the soft leather of my chair. I did not blink. I did not want to miss a single microsecond of the impact. The coordinator reached the center of the room. She tapped Barbara gently on the shoulder, interrupting a loud, boasting laugh. Barbara turned around, her smile dropping for a fraction of a second in annoyance before she recognized the event manager. I watched through the glass as the coordinator leaned in close, speaking quietly into Barbara's ear, respectfully requesting the final payment so the evening could proceed. Barbara offered a dismissive, arrogant wave of her hand, clearly irritated by the mundane interruption of her grand social moment. She reached into her sequined clutch purse. She was entirely confident. She was completely unaware that the financial ground beneath her feet had already crumbled to dust. Barbara pulled a sleek plastic card from her designer purse. Even from my distance in the lobby, I instantly recognized the metallic sheen of the Platinum Rewards card. It was the card bearing my name, the medical emergency lifeline she had twisted into her personal luxury fund. She handed it to the coordinator with a supreme, effortless flick of her wrist, never once breaking eye contact with her circle of admiring church friends. The coordinator accepted the card. She typed the massive final balance into the wireless terminal, her fingers flying across the digital keypad. She inserted the chip into the base of the machine and waited. I held my breath. The machine processed the request for 2 agonizing seconds. Then a sharp, angry red light flashed across the top of the small digital screen. A tiny slip of receipt paper printed out bearing the automated, undeniable code of a hard decline. The coordinator frowned. She pulled the card out, wiped the metal chip on the sleeve of her blazer, and politely informed Barbara that the transaction had not gone through. I watched Barbara's arrogant smile falter. She let out a sharp, forced laugh, clearly trying to play off the moment as a minor humorous inconvenience to the wealthy women standing around her. She waved her hand again, telling the coordinator that the machine was likely malfunctioning. She instructed the woman to run it a second time. The coordinator inserted the card again. She pressed the authorization button. The machine communicated with the banking servers. The red light flashed instantly. Another tiny slip of paper printed out, declined. The color began to drain from Barbara's face. Her forced smile tightened into a rigid, panicked grimace. The church ladies standing around her suddenly grew very quiet, their eyes darting between the blinking red light of the credit card machine and Barbara's increasingly pale expression. The coordinator was no longer smiling. The polite, deferential demeanor of a service worker vanished instantly, replaced by the strict, unyielding enforcement of a business protecting its assets. She leaned in closer to Barbara, her posture stiffening. She was firmly informing her that the card was totally locked, and they desperately needed an alternative form of payment immediately, or the kitchen staff would halt the dinner service. Complete panic finally took root in Barbara's eyes. She frantically patted down her sequined clutch, looking for a solution she knew she did not possess. She snapped her head around her eyes, scanning the crowded ballroom with desperate, wild energy. She spotted Liam standing near the bar with his groomsmen, laughing and drinking a premium craft beer. Barbara raised her hand and frantically waved him over, her gestures sharp and frantic. Liam excused himself from his friends and jogged over to his mother. He looked incredibly handsome in his custom tuxedo, but his face registered deep annoyance at being pulled away from his celebration. Barbara grabbed his arm the second he was within reach. She pulled him close, whispering furiously into his ear, pointing at the wedding coordinator and the black credit card machine. I watched Liam's posture change. The annoyance melted into supreme confidence. He was the successful son, the financial underwriter, the man of the house coming to save the day. He gave his mother a reassuring pat on the shoulder, offering a calm, arrogant smile to the wedding coordinator. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his leather wallet. He extracted the shiny blue debit card linked directly to our primary joint checking account. The account that held thousands of dollars of my hard-earned salary. The account I had permanently frozen hours ago. Liam handed the card to the coordinator with a flourish of absolute certainty. He believed he was the hero of the hour, effortlessly resolving a minor banking error with his own vast resources. The coordinator took the blue debit card. She typed in the balance once more. She inserted the chip. Liam stood tall, projecting total calm to the audience of whispering church ladies. He waited for the approving green light. The red light flashed. The machine beeped a loud, angry tone of rejection. Declined. Liam physically recoiled. His confident smile completely shattered. He stared at the machine as if it had just grown fangs. He aggressively snatched the card back from the coordinator, inspecting the plastic as if the card itself were defective. He told her to run it again, his voice visibly rising in volume. She ran it again. Declined. The social facade of the Dixon family began to violently crack in real time. The coordinator took a deliberate step back from Liam, pulling the payment terminal tightly against her chest. She raised her hand and made a sharp, distinct signal toward the back of the room. Instantly, the seamless machinery of the luxury event came to a grinding, brutal halt. The catering staff, who had been gracefully weaving through the crowd with silver trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres, suddenly stopped in their tracks. They turned around in unison and began marching briskly back through the swinging kitchen doors, taking the food with them. A moment later, the gentle ambient music from the string quartet abruptly faded into an uncomfortable, echoing silence. The musicians lowered their instruments, looking toward the event coordinator for instructions. The abrupt absence of food and music sent a shockwave through the room. 150 wealthy, expectant guests suddenly stopped talking. Every single head in the grand ballroom turned simultaneously toward the center of the floor, where Barbara and Liam were currently engaged in a heated, highly visible argument with the venue staff. Liam yanked his smartphone out of his pocket. His thumbs flew across the screen, his face contorting in sheer terror as he frantically tried to load his mobile banking application. I knew exactly what he was seeing on that screen. Red alerts, locked accounts, 0 available balances. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with absolute suffocating horror. Barbara grabbed his tuxedo sleeve, shaking his arm violently, demanding he fix the situation before they were publicly ruined. Jessica, noticing the abrupt silence and the disappearing waiters, rushed over in her extravagant white gown, her face flushed with confusion and rising anger. The pristine high society dream was imploding in front of the entire congregation. The murmurs began to spread through the crowd like wildfire. Wealthy neighbors and church elders whispered behind their hands, pointing at the panicked family in the center of the room. The absolute humiliation they had tried to inflict upon me in the church foyer was now being served back to them on a massive, highly public scale. I sat in my leather chair in the lobby, perfectly calm, my coffee resting quietly on my knee. The first stage of the demolition was complete. The money was gone, the facade was broken, and the desperation had officially reached its peak. Now, it was only a matter of seconds before they realized exactly who had pulled the plug. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom swung violently open. The elegant illusion of the Oak Ridge Country Club was instantly shattered by the frantic, uncoordinated exit of my in-laws. They spilled out into the quiet luxury of the lobby like a sinking ship ejecting its most desperate passengers. Barbara was leading the charge, her silver gown swishing aggressively against the polished marble floor. Her face, which just moments ago had radiated absolute high society triumph, was now contorted into a mask of pure, sweating panic. Richard trailed closely behind her, clutching his chest and breathing heavily while Jessica struggled to keep up in her massive white dress, whining loudly about the disappearing waiters. Liam brought up the rear. He had his smartphone pressed tightly against his ear, pacing in tight circles and glaring at the screen as if the device itself had betrayed him. He was violently stabbing his thumb against the glass, desperately trying to log into the banking application that I had permanently locked. They had retreated to the lobby to escape the 150 pairs of judging eyes inside the reception hall. They needed a quiet, secluded place to call the bank and fix what they blindly assumed was a massive, humiliating clerical error. They did not expect to find me sitting there. I remained perfectly still in my high-backed leather chair by the unlit stone fireplace. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee and watched them unravel. It took them nearly 30 seconds to notice me. Liam was the first to look up from his useless phone. His eyes locked onto my face, and his entire body jolted as if he had been struck by a physical electrical current. He grabbed his mother by the shoulder and pointed a shaking finger in my direction. Barbara snapped her head toward me. For a fraction of a second, absolute confusion washed over her features. She could not comprehend why the working-class daughter-in-law she had banished to the suburbs was sitting comfortably in the lobby of her exclusive country club. But that confusion instantly morphed into a blind, raging fury. She did not see a woman who had finally fought back. She only saw the broken, automated teller machine that was failing to dispense her cash. Barbara marched aggressively across the marble floor. Her heels clicked like rapid gunfire against the stone. She stopped less than 2 feet from my chair, looming over me with an expression of absolute vicious entitlement. She demanded to know what I was doing there. Without waiting for an answer, she launched into a furious, breathless command. She told me the bank had made a catastrophic error. She said the credit cards were declining, and the venue manager was threatening to shut down the entire reception before the first course was even served. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face and ordered me to call the fraud department this exact second to fix the glitch. She warned me that her wealthy friends were beginning to ask questions, and that I was going to humiliate the entire family if I did not clear the security hold right now. She truly believed this was simply an inconvenience. She honestly thought I was just sitting there, waiting to rescue her. Richard arrived behind her, his face flushed a dangerous shade of purple. He angrily muttered that my cheap bank was ruining the most important day of his daughter's life. Jessica hovered near the grand piano, clutching the layers of her absurdly expensive dress, openly sobbing about how the string quartet had packed up their instruments and left the stage. She whined that her perfect photos were completely ruined and demanded that I fix it before her wealthy in-laws realized they were eating nothing but ice water and stale dinner rolls. Then, Liam stepped forward. My husband, the man who had secretly funneled my salary to finance this exact spectacle, looked down at me with sheer, unadulterated rage. He did not ask how I felt. He did not express an ounce of remorse for handing over my social security number. Instead, he went immediately on the offensive. He yelled at me, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet lobby. He demanded to know why I was being so incredibly petty and vindictive. He asked me what kind of sick person shows up to a country club just to gloat over a banking error. He told me I was acting like a jealous child because I had been asked to stay home. He commanded me to unlock the checking account immediately, claiming I had absolutely no right to freeze his access to our shared money. He said I was taking a minor family disagreement and intentionally blowing it up into a public spectacle just to punish his sister. He ordered me to pick up my phone, authorize the $24,000 payment, and go back to the house where I belonged. He promised we would deal with my insubordinate behavior later, but right now, I needed to do my job and pay the vendors. I sat there and absorbed every single hateful word. I let them exhaust their breath. I let them scream and demand and threaten. I looked at their flushed, angry faces and saw them for exactly what they were. They were parasites. They were arrogant, entitled thieves who believed they had an absolute divine right to my money, my credit, and my future. I slowly placed my coffee mug onto the small glass table next to my chair. The ceramic clinked softly against the surface. I uncrossed my legs, placed my hands flat on the armrests, and stood up. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream back at them. I had learned from my years of managing difficult people that true absolute power never needs to yell. I smoothed the front of my slacks, stood up straight, and looked directly into my mother-in-law's eyes. I spoke with a chilling, quiet calmness that caused the air in the lobby to suddenly feel 10 degrees colder. I told Barbara there was no glitch. I told her the bank had not made a mistake. I explained that I had personally called the executives at the bank 2 hours ago and permanently canceled the Platinum Rewards card. I told her the account was closed, the authorized user privileges were revoked, and she would never spend another single penny of my money for the rest of her miserable life. Barbara physically stumbled backward as if I had shoved her. Her mouth fell open in an ugly, slack-jawed expression of sheer disbelief. Richard grabbed her arm to steady her, his eyes widening in sudden, terrifying comprehension. I turned my attention entirely to Liam. He was staring at me with a mixture of rage and rising panic. I kept my voice perfectly steady, slicing through his arrogance like a surgeon's scalpel. I told him I knew everything. I told him I knew about the secret external checking account. I watched the remaining color completely drain from his face as I recited the exact dollar amounts he had been secretly siphoning out of my paychecks for the last 3 years. I told him I had exported the entire transaction history, perfectly tracking every single stolen dime he used to pay off the exorbitant interest on his mother's luxury shopping sprees. Liam began to shake. He raised his hands in a frantic defensive gesture, stammering that he could explain that it was not what it looked like, that he was just trying to protect me from the stress of his family's debt. I cut him off completely. I told him he was a coward and a thief. I informed him that while he was standing in the master bathroom taking a hot shower and putting on his expensive rented tuxedo, I had packed my bags and left the house forever. I told him I had left a beautiful silver gift box resting squarely on his pillow. I advised him to open it the moment he got home, because inside that box, he would find our formal signed divorce papers, the printed proof of his systemic embezzlement, and a detailed copy of a federal police report. Jessica let out a loud, dramatic wail that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. She stomped her expensive heel against the marble floor, completely ignoring the fact that her brother's marriage had just imploded and her parents were facing total financial ruin. She shrieked that I was a horrible, selfish monster. She cried that the country club manager was going to kick them out into the parking lot. She demanded to know how she was supposed to face her wealthy in-laws without any food or music, whining that her beautiful photographs were entirely ruined and her social standing was completely destroyed. She showed absolutely zero remorse. She did not care that her parents had stolen my identity. She only cared about her champagne tower and her imported orchids. I looked at the 33-year-old woman throwing a temper tantrum in a wedding dress and felt a profound, overwhelming sense of relief that I would never have to attend another one of her ridiculous family events again. Barbara was hyperventilating now. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down upon her shoulders. She realized that the free ride was permanently over, but she had not yet grasped the sheer magnitude of the danger she was currently in. She still believed this was just a domestic financial dispute. She thought the worst thing happening to her was social embarrassment. She lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger in my face. She hissed that I would pay for this humiliation. She promised to destroy my reputation at our church and tell everyone in the congregation that I was a cruel, vindictive woman who abandoned her family over a simple misunderstanding. She demanded that Liam use his joint debit card to pay the country club right now, aggressively telling him to empty their savings if he had to. I looked at Liam. He was staring at his shoes, thoroughly broken. He quietly admitted to his mother that the debit card was completely declined too. He whispered that all the joint accounts were frozen and he did not have access to a single dollar. The silence that followed his confession was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The mighty family who had spent years looking down their noses at my working-class background were currently standing in the lobby of a luxury country club without a single dime to their names. Barbara looked frantically from her son to her husband. Richard was sweating profusely, his hands digging into his pockets. The country club manager, flanked by 2 burly security guards, was now visibly marching across the lobby toward our location. He looked incredibly angry, and he was holding a long printed invoice in his hand. The grace period for fixing the payment glitch was officially over. They were about to be publicly evicted from their own party. I stood my ground, my hands relaxed at my sides, watching the utter devastation wash over their faces. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought I was too weak to defend myself. They had absolutely no idea that the real punishment had not even begun yet. I watched Richard pull his hand out of his jacket pocket. His fingers were trembling violently as he gripped a small folded piece of paper. The final trap was about to be sprung. The country club manager, a tall man with a rigid posture and an impeccably tailored navy suit, closed the distance between the ballroom doors and our section of the lobby. 2 burly security guards flanked him, their presence transforming the opulent space into a highly restricted zone. The manager did not look amused. He did not care about Jessica's white dress or Barbara's silver gown. He only cared about the bottom line, and his bottom line was currently bleeding thousands of dollars. He stopped directly in front of Richard. His voice was quiet but laced with absolute corporate menace. He informed my father-in-law that the grace period for resolving the banking error had officially expired. He stated that unless a valid authorized form of payment for $34,000 was presented immediately, he would have no choice but to clear the ballroom lock, the facility doors, and contact local authorities for theft of services. The threat of the police being called for an unpaid catering bill sent a fresh, violent wave of terror through Barbara. She grabbed Richard's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into the fabric of his suit jacket. She begged him to do something. She pleaded with him to fix this before her wealthy friends walked out into the lobby and saw them being treated like common criminals. Jessica let out a loud, pathetic sob, hiding her face behind her hands, completely incapable of handling a single moment of genuine adversity. Liam stood frozen, absolutely useless, his eyes darting frantically between his father and the security guards. Richard was sweating profusely. Large droplets formed on his forehead, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. He patted his pockets, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked at his wife, at his crying daughter, and then he looked at me. His eyes were filled with pure, concentrated hatred. He truly blamed me for this entire disaster. He believed that my refusal to be a compliant, silent wallet was the sole reason his family was facing total social destruction. In a sheer blind panic to save face with the country club manager, Richard reached his trembling hand deep into the inner breast pocket of his tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a crisp, white piece of standard printer paper folded neatly into quarters. I knew exactly what was printed on that piece of paper. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my exterior remained perfectly terrifyingly still. That piece of paper contained the 16-digit digital credit card number, the expiration date, and the temporary security code for the premium rewards account they had fraudulently opened in my name just a few hours ago. It was the absolute climax of their entitlement. They had stolen my social security number, bypassed my security questions, and secured a $30,000 credit line, all from the comfort of their living room. And now, Richard was about to hand that stolen information to a merchant to pay for his daughter's luxury party. He unfolded the paper with shaky hands. The country club manager watched him with a skeptical, impatient glare, holding out his wireless payment terminal. I took a single, deliberate step forward. The marble floor felt cold beneath my shoes. I did not raise my voice, but the sheer gravity of my tone cut through the frantic tension in the lobby. I looked directly into Richard's eyes and delivered my final warning. I told him that if he handed that specific string of numbers to the manager, he would be crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. I stated clearly and firmly that he could not undo what would happen next. I gave him one last chance to walk away, one tiny fleeting opportunity to save himself from a federal prison sentence. If he put the paper back in his pocket, they would face a massive civil lawsuit from the country club, and they would be socially ruined, but they would avoid a felony conviction. But arrogant people never know when to surrender. Richard did not see a warning. He saw a challenge. He thought I was bluffing. He genuinely believed I was just trying to scare him into submission, attempting to ruin their magical evening out of pure spite. A cruel, triumphant sneer spread across his sweating face. He stood up taller, throwing his shoulders back, projecting a false bravado that made me sick to my stomach. He told me to shut my mouth and stay out of grown-up business. He proudly declared that he had secured emergency financing from a private lender, completely bypassing my petty little restrictions. He gloated that my attempts to sabotage his family had failed completely. With a grand sweeping gesture of absolute defiance, Richard thrust the folded paper into the hands of the country club manager. He aggressively instructed the man to manually punch the digits into the terminal and process the full $34,000 balance immediately. The trap snapped shut with a resounding, invisible click. They had done it. They had willfully and intentionally presented stolen financial credentials to a merchant. The crime of aggravated identity theft was now a completed, undeniable physical action. There was absolutely no going back. The country club manager did not care where the numbers came from. He just wanted his money. He held the piece of paper in his left hand and used his right index finger to rapidly punch the 16 digits into the sleek black payment terminal. The lobby was incredibly quiet. The only sound was the rapid, rhythmic tapping of the plastic keys. Barbara leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together in a desperate prayer, her eyes fixed entirely on the small digital screen. Jessica stopped crying for a brief second, holding her breath, waiting for the magical green light that would save her perfect photographs. Liam watched his father with a look of confused relief, clearly wondering how Richard had magically produced thousands of dollars out of thin air. I simply watched the heavy glass doors of the main entrance. The manager finished typing the card details. He entered the expiration date and the security code. He typed in the massive total balance. Then he pressed the bright green authorization button. The terminal connected to the wireless network. The screen displayed a spinning processing icon. 1 second passed. 2 seconds passed. Suddenly, the machine emitted a harsh, piercing alarm tone. It was completely different from the standard decline beep we had heard earlier. This was a loud, continuous, aggressive warning siren designed to alert a merchant to a severe security threat. The manager jumped slightly, startled by the sheer volume of the device in his hands. He looked down at the digital display. The screen flashed a bright warning red. The message printed across the interface did not say insufficient funds. It did not say, please try again. In bold, unmistakable letters, the screen displayed a critical merchant instruction to confiscate the card immediately and contact law enforcement. The account had been flagged directly by the National Bank's fraud division as severely compromised and stolen. The manager looked up from the machine. His professional, polite demeanor was entirely gone. His face hardened into a mask of pure anger and deep suspicion. He glared at Richard, clutching the piece of paper tightly in his fist. He informed my father-in-law in a loud, commanding voice that the account numbers provided had just triggered a maximum security fraud alert. He loudly announced that the bank had flagged the information as stolen property. Barbara let out a sharp, terrified gasp. The remaining color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking physically ill. She grabbed Richard's arm again, her voice shaking violently as she demanded to know what was happening. Richard stood completely paralyzed. His triumphant, arrogant sneer had melted away, replaced by an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. He looked from the manager to the blinking red terminal, and then finally his terrified eyes locked onto me. He finally understood. He realized I had not been bluffing. He realized I knew exactly what they had done in the middle of the night. Before Richard could formulate a single lie or offer a desperate excuse, the atmosphere in the country club lobby drastically shifted. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows flanking the main entrance, a brilliant explosion of flashing red and blue lights suddenly pierced the twilight. The vibrant colors reflected off the polished marble floors and the crystal chandeliers painting the luxurious lobby in the undeniable frantic hues of a police emergency. 2 heavily marked local police cruisers accelerated rapidly up the long, curving private driveway. They bypassed the valet station entirely, bringing their heavy vehicles to a sudden, aggressive halt directly in front of the main glass doors. The tires screeched loudly against the pristine pavement. Jessica screamed. It was a high-pitched, guttural sound of pure panic. She stumbled backward, tripping over the heavy layers of her white wedding dress, nearly collapsing onto a nearby leather sofa. Liam's mouth fell completely open. He stared at the flashing lights, his entire body trembling, as the catastrophic reality of the situation crashed down upon him. The heavy glass doors swung open. 4 uniformed police officers strode purposefully into the lobby. Their heavy utility belts and radios clanked against their dark uniforms, introducing a harsh, gritty reality into the delicate, high society fantasy. Leading the officers was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a sharp gray suit and a gold detective's badge clipped to his belt. I recognized his authoritative demeanor immediately. It was Detective Miller, the financial crimes investigator I had spoken to on the phone just a few hours earlier from the sweltering heat of my car. Detective Miller walked with absolute, unwavering purpose. He did not pause to admire the floral arrangements or the marble columns. His sharp eyes scanned the lobby, sweeping past the terrified guests and the shocked country club staff, until his gaze locked directly onto our chaotic circle near the fireplace. He marched straight toward us, stopping just a few feet away from where Richard and Barbara stood frozen in absolute terror. The uniformed officers fanned out slightly, establishing a secure perimeter that blocked any possible route of escape. The entire country club lobby fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Wealthy members lowered their champagne glasses. The valet staff stopped moving. Every single eye in the building was glued to the spectacular downfall of the Dixon family. Detective Miller reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a Sol-Point, a small leather notebook. He did not introduce himself with a polite greeting. He spoke with the loud, booming voice of a man who commanded absolute authority. He addressed the group directly, asking to identify Richard and Barbara. His eyes locked onto my in-laws, recognizing their panicked expressions as the universal sign of profound guilt. He stated his name and his department, clearly announcing that he was a lead investigator with the Financial Crimes Division. He then delivered the words that completely destroyed their entire world. He informed them that they were officially under investigation for felony wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. He stated that the police department had received a verified report, along with digital evidence, indicating they had illegally used stolen Social Security credentials to secure fraudulent lines of credit. And he noted that they had just attempted to execute a massive transaction using those exact stolen funds. The trap had perfectly, flawlessly snapped shut, and the authorities had arrived to collect the catch. A piercing theatrical scream shattered the heavy silence of the country club lobby. It did not come from Barbara or Richard. It came from Jessica. She threw her hands to the sides of her meticulously styled hair and let out a shrill, vibrating shriek that echoed off the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. The sound was so jarring and completely out of place in the refined establishment that it acted like a physical alarm bell. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom, which had been cracked open to let the waitstaff pass, were suddenly pushed completely wide. The initial wave of wealthy church congregants and local socialites spilled out into the lobby, their faces twisted in absolute shock and morbid curiosity. They had been waiting for their premium seafood dinners and champagne toasts. Instead, they were greeted by the spectacular, terrifying sight of 4 uniformed police officers surrounding the esteemed guests of honor. The congregation members froze in their tracks. Women in expensive silk gowns gasped and clutched their designer evening bags. Men in tailored suits murmured in low, urgent tones to one another. I saw the head pastor of our church standing near the front of the crowd, his eyes wide with sheer disbelief as he took in the scene. The perfectly constructed facade of the wealthy, pious, and generous family was actively burning to the ground right in front of the exact audience they had spent a decade trying to impress. Detective Miller did not care about the audience. He was a professional doing his job, and his focus remained entirely on the 2 terrified people standing in front of him. He instructed the uniformed officers to step forward. Richard tried to back away, his hands raised in a feeble gesture of surrender. His face was a ghastly, slick shade of gray. He stammered out a series of broken, incoherent sentences. He claimed there was a massive mistake, a clerical error, a simple misunderstanding between family members that could be resolved with a quick phone call. He looked frantically at the country club manager, begging the man to tear up the piece of paper with the stolen credit card number. But the manager simply handed the paper directly to Detective Miller, providing the physical evidence of the attempted felony fraud. Barbara was entirely paralyzed. The matriarch who had commanded the church foyer with absolute terrifying authority just 6 days ago was now trembling violently. Her knees seemed to buckle beneath the weight of her expensive silver gown. She looked around at her friends at the congregation and at the wealthy in-laws standing near the ballroom doors. She saw the disgust and judgment radiating from their faces. The social standing she valued above everything else in the world was completely gone. Detective Miller signaled to his officers. 2 men stepped forward, unclipped the metal handcuffs from their utility belts, and instructed Richard and Barbara to turn around and place their hands behind their backs. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting closed around my father-in-law's wrists echoed loudly in the quiet lobby. It was the sound of absolute, undeniable justice. Barbara began to hyperventilate as the cold metal circled her own wrists. She wept openly, her careful makeup running in dark, ugly streaks down her cheeks. She cried out to her friends in the crowd, begging them to call an attorney, swearing she was innocent. But not a single person stepped forward to help her. They all took a collective, synchronized step backward, distancing themselves entirely from the criminals in their midst. Then Liam made the worst mistake of his entire life. My husband, the cowardly enabler who had secretly orchestrated my financial ruin, decided to play the hero. He puffed out his chest, adjusted his expensive tuxedo jacket, and aggressively stepped between Detective Miller and his weeping mother. He raised his voice, demanding the officers release his parents immediately. He puffed up his professional credentials, loudly announcing that he was a senior financial underwriter and that he could personally guarantee this was nothing more than an authorized familial bridge loan. He told the detective he was vastly overstepping his jurisdiction and threatening them with a false arrest. Detective Miller did not back down. He simply looked at Liam with a calm, calculating expression. He pulled a folded document from his inner suit pocket. It was a copy of the formal police report I had filed earlier that day. He reviewed the notes, looked back up at Liam, and asked him to confirm his full legal name. Liam stated his name with arrogant, misplaced pride. The detective nodded slowly. He informed Liam that during the initial fraud investigation, the bank had uncovered a secondary, highly suspicious pattern of financial activity linked directly to the victim's primary checking account. He stated that the authorities were actively looking into a systematic, prolonged case of domestic embezzlement. He noted that tens of thousands of dollars had been secretly funneled into an external account registered exclusively under Liam's social security number. Liam's arrogant posture instantly collapsed. The bravado vanished completely, replaced by the terrifying realization that his own secret crimes had been dragged into the harsh light of a federal investigation. He opened his mouth, but his voice failed him entirely. Detective Miller informed Liam that because he was actively interfering with a felony arrest and was a primary person of interest in an ongoing embezzlement investigation, he was no longer free to leave the premises. The detective signaled to a third officer standing near the entrance. He instructed the officer to detain my husband for questioning. Liam let out a strangled, pathetic sound as the officer grabbed him by the arm and firmly guided him toward the glass doors of the lobby. Jessica was screaming hysterically now, stomping her feet and wailing about her ruined photographs, completely ignoring the fact that her brother and her parents were being marched out of her vow renewal in police custody. The scene in the country club lobby was something out of a dramatic film, yet it was unfolding with the raw, messy reality of true justice. 150 guests watched in stunned, breathless silence as the 3 members of my husband's family were systematically secured by law enforcement. The sheer magnitude of their downfall was staggering. They had walked into this building expecting to be treated like absolute royalty, and they were leaving it as criminal suspects in front of the entire town. As the officers began to guide Richard toward the main entrance, Barbara planted her high heels firmly against the polished marble floor. She refused to move forward. She twisted her body around, fighting against the officer holding her arm, her eyes desperately scanning the vast, crowded room. She was looking for a lifeline. She was looking for a way out of the unimaginable nightmare she had created for herself. Her frantic, tear-filled gaze finally landed on me. I was still standing quietly near the leather wingback chair, completely untouched by the chaos swirling around the room. I had not raised my voice once. I had not shed a single tear. I had simply watched the inevitable consequences of their arrogance catch up to them. Barbara locked eyes with me. The profound, vicious hatred that usually characterized her expression was entirely gone. It was replaced by a pathetic, groveling desperation. The woman who had told me I was not worthy of standing in this building was now looking at me like I was her only savior. She dragged her feet, forcing the officer to stop for a brief moment. She leaned forward, the metal handcuffs clinking sharply behind her back. She raised her voice, projecting across the quiet, staring crowd of church ladies and local elites. She called out my name. Her voice was shaking, thick with tears and absolute panic. She begged me to step forward and talk to the detective. She pleaded with me to tell the authorities that I had given her permission to use the Social Security number. She cried that it was just a massive misunderstanding between a mother and her daughter-in-law. She told me I had the power to make all of this go away right now. She actually tried to leverage the concept of family one final desperate time. She begged me to protect the family name. She said if I just cleared the security hold and told the police it was a permitted bridge loan, they would release her and Liam immediately. She promised me they would pay me back every single penny. She swore that things would be different, that I would be included from now on, that I was a cherished member of their household. She was lying, of course. If I saved her, she would resent me even more for witnessing her weakness. She would spend the rest of her life trying to punish me for her own humiliation. But I did not need a psychological analysis to know my answer. I had known my answer since the moment she laughed at me in the church foyer. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The crowd of wealthy guests parted slightly, their eyes darting rapidly between my calm face and Barbara's weeping, ruined makeup. I did not walk all the way over to her. I maintained my distance, keeping a clear physical boundary between my new life and their absolute destruction. I looked at my mother-in-law. I looked at the metal handcuffs securing her wrists. I looked at the terrified, sweating face of my father-in-law, and I looked at Liam, who was staring at the floor, too ashamed to even meet my gaze. I thought about the 3 years of financial abuse. I thought about the thousands of dollars they stole from my long hours at the pharmacy. I thought about the snide comments, the intentional exclusions, and the complete lack of basic human respect. I let the silence hang in the air for a few profound seconds, ensuring that every single person in the country club lobby was listening closely to my response. I kept my voice perfectly level. The calmness of my tone amplified the devastating weight of my words. I told her I would absolutely love to help her out of this situation. I offered a tiny, polite smile, the exact same kind of condescending smile she had given me on Sunday morning. I said I would truly love to step in and fix this massive misunderstanding for her. Then I let my smile fade into an expression of cold, absolute finality. But like you told me at church, Barbara, I am simply not worthy of attending your exclusive family events. The words echoed cleanly across the marble lobby. Several church members in the crowd actually gasped aloud. They remembered the incident. They remembered standing by and watching her bully me, and now they were witnessing the brutal, uncompromising exactment of karma. I looked at Jessica, who was still weeping near the grand piano in her ruined white dress. I looked back at Barbara, whose mouth was opening and closing like a suffocating fish. I told her to have a truly wonderful vow renewal. I did not wait for her response. I did not wait to watch the police physically drag them out the doors and shove them into the back of the marked patrol cruisers. The show was officially over, and my role in their lives was permanently concluded. I turned my back on the entire Dixon family. I walked smoothly and purposefully across the polished marble floor. The crowd of stunned guests naturally parted to let me through, offering me a wide, respectful berth. No one tried to stop me. No one asked me any questions. They simply watched me walk away from the burning wreckage of a fake high society dynasty. I reached the massive, heavy glass doors of the main entrance. I pushed them open and stepped out of the air-conditioned lobby into the beautiful, warm afternoon. The bright sunlight hit my face, instantly chasing away the cold, clinical atmosphere of the country club. The air smelled fresh, clean, and completely unburdened. I walked down the stone steps and headed toward the overflow parking lot where I had left my car. My phone was silent in my pocket. My bank accounts were safely locked. My personal identity was permanently secured. I opened the driver's side door, slid into the seat, and started the engine. For the first time in 4 years, I was not driving back to a house filled with resentment and financial exploitation. I was driving toward an empty, quiet hotel room, and eventually a brand new life built entirely on my own terms. I put the car in gear, drove past the flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers, and did not look back in the rearview mirror once. The drive away from the Oak Country Club was the most peaceful journey I had ever taken. The winding, tree-lined road that led away from the sprawling golf course felt like a literal pathway out of a dark, suffocating tunnel. I rolled down the windows of my vehicle, allowing the warm, rushing wind to completely clear the stale air of the country club from my lungs. The oppressive weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for the past 4 years, the constant need to people please, the endless financial anxiety, and the quiet, desperate hope for acceptance had completely vanished. I had entered that building as a discarded, uninvited ghost. I was leaving it as the absolute author of my own destiny. They had tried to drain my resources and crush my spirit, but in their supreme arrogance, they had only managed to hand me the exact tools I needed to cut the heavy chains binding me to their toxic lives. As the elegant iron gates of the country club shrank into the distance, I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of lightness. The future was entirely mine, and the only person I would ever have to prove my worth to was the woman staring back at me in the rearview mirror. 6 full months have passed since the chaotic, flashing blue and red lights of the local police cruisers illuminated the towering marble columns of the Oak Ridge Country Club. The crisp autumn air of that disastrous weekend has completely faded away, gradually replaced by a bright, warm, and deeply hopeful spring. The spectacular and highly public collapse of my former in-laws did not simply end on that Saturday afternoon in the lavish lobby. It sent a massive, highly destructive shockwave through every single aspect of their carefully curated lives. The legal system, much like a meticulous pharmacy inventory audit, is completely unforgiving when it comes to finally balancing the books. The management at the exclusive country club did not simply write off the ruined vow renewal as a bad day for business. The imported white orchids had already been cut and arranged. The premium seafood catering menu had already been prepared in the massive industrial kitchen. The dedicated waitstaff, the event coordinators, and the professional string quartet had already billed their expensive hourly rates. The venue immediately filed a massive civil lawsuit against Richard and Barbara for severe breach of contract and intentional theft of services. Because they had absolutely no liquid assets to their names, and their personal credit was utterly destroyed by the ongoing fraud investigation, my former in-laws could not afford to mount any kind of meaningful legal defense. They were completely crushed under the overwhelming weight of the massive civil judgment. However, that civil lawsuit was merely a minor financial inconvenience compared to the devastating criminal charges they faced. Detective Miller and the Financial Crimes Division built an absolutely airtight, undeniable case of felony identity theft and deliberate wire fraud. Richard and Barbara were absolutely terrified of standing before a strict federal judge and facing a lengthy prison sentence. Without my 6-figure pharmacy salary available to hire a high-powered miracle-working defense attorney, they were forcefully backed into a dark legal corner. They were forced to accept a harsh, unforgiving plea deal just to avoid serving hard time behind bars. The court placed them on strict criminal probation for 5 long years and ordered them to pay crushing financial restitution to the affected banking institutions. To satisfy the relentless court orders and the heavy country club lawsuit, they were forced to completely liquidate their remaining assets. They had to put their immaculate, pristine colonial house in the suburbs on the real estate market. The bank aggressively seized the profits from the sale to settle their outstanding debts. The wealthy, arrogant couple, who had so viciously mocked my working-class background, was suddenly forced to pack their belongings into cardboard boxes and move into a tiny, run-down, 1-bedroom rental apartment located on the far industrial outskirts of the city. Their high society friends from the church congregation completely abandoned them, blocking their phone numbers and pretending they had never associated with convicted fraudsters. My divorce from Liam was swift, brutal, and entirely one-sided. Victoria, my brilliant and utterly ruthless attorney, presented the family court judge with the undeniable digital proof of his systemic long-term embezzlement. The judge was absolutely disgusted by the fact that a grown man working as a financial underwriter had secretly siphoned his own wife's grueling salary to illegally fund his mother's luxury lifestyle. The final divorce settlement completely stripped Liam of his arrogant pride and his financial security. Liam's secret external checking account was entirely drained by court order, and every single stolen dollar was returned directly to my possession. Because the stolen funds far exceeded his liquid assets, the court ordered a permanent aggressive garnishment of his professional corporate wages. Every single time he receives a paycheck from his underwriting firm, a massive chunk of his earnings is automatically deducted and transferred directly back into my secure bank account. He is currently living in a dark, depressing basement-level apartment complex. He spends his evenings eating cheap microwave dinners and desperately trying to hide his ruined personal reputation from his judgmental corporate colleagues. But perhaps the most poetic, perfectly balanced justice fell upon Jessica. Her grand 10-year vow renewal was famously recorded in our town's local social history as a catastrophic police raid. Her wealthy Silicon Valley in-laws were absolutely mortified by the public arrests of her parents. They completely distanced themselves from the toxic Dixon family drama, tightly restricting the generous financial allowances they used to provide to her husband. Without her parents available to constantly subsidize her expensive habits and luxury shopping sprees, Jessica's husband finally put his foot down and gave her a harsh reality check. He demanded she immediately contribute to their household income to offset the loss of his family's financial support. The golden child, the arrogant woman who had laughed at my practical shoes and deemed me totally unfit to stand in her elegant country club photographs, was forcefully pushed into the real world. Because she had absolutely zero professional experience and no marketable skills to speak of, she was forced to accept a minimum wage job as a retail cashier at a busy local department store. She now spends 40 hours a week, standing on her sore feet, wearing a cheap polyester uniform with a plastic name tag, and dealing with angry, demanding customers who treat her exactly the way she used to treat me. She is currently living the exact grueling working-class reality she had so viciously mocked me for enduring. I am sitting alone in the spacious living room of my brand-new, beautiful condominium. It is a stunning, quiet space located high above the bustling city streets, featuring massive glass windows that let the golden morning sunlight pour warmly across the polished hardwood floors. There is absolutely no tension in this house. There are no frantic, demanding text messages asking for emergency funds. There are no condescending judgments about my clothing, my career, or my background. The space is filled only with the peaceful, steady, and incredibly comforting rhythm of my own independent life. I am holding a warm ceramic mug of hot dark roast coffee, and my laptop is resting comfortably on my knees. I have my banking application open on the bright screen. My primary checking account is thriving, completely protected by highly secure passwords and two-factor authentication protocols that no one else in the world possesses. I navigate over to my credit monitoring portal to review my files. My personal credit score is an immaculate 810. It is a perfect, flawless number representing years of extreme hard work, unwavering discipline, and absolute financial independence. I look at that 3-digit number on the glowing screen and allow myself a long moment of deep, profound reflection. For 4 incredibly difficult years, I desperately tried to purchase love, respect, and basic acceptance from people who were entirely incapable of giving it. I actively shrunk my own personality down to fit into a tiny, uncomfortable box just to make them feel larger. I worked exhausting double shifts at the pharmacy, standing on my feet, until my back ached, and willingly handed over the fruits of my labor. I truly believed that if I just paid enough of their bills, cooked enough holiday meals, and stayed quiet enough during their insults, I would eventually earn the absolute right to be called their family. I allowed them to treat my physical presence as a heavy burden and my bank account as a divine right. I convinced myself that conditional love was somehow better than experiencing no love at all. I realize now, sitting in the quiet peace of my own beautiful home, that they never hated me for being working class. They did not actually despise my practical clothing or my humble, hardworking background. They hated me because I was entirely self-sufficient, and they were nothing more than well-dressed, incompetent parasites. They deeply resented my financial independence because it constantly highlighted their own pathetic failures and massive insecurities. They wanted to tear me down socially and exclude me from their events because I was the only structural pillar holding them up financially. By attempting to completely erase me from their perfect high society photographs, they accidentally gave me the exact objective perspective I needed to clearly see their absolute ugliness. Healing from that severe level of emotional and financial manipulation is not a fast or easy process. It takes considerable time, daily patience, and a lot of professional therapy to completely unlearn the toxic, deeply ingrained habits of a chronic people pleaser. But I have finally reached a place of pure, unshakable mental clarity. I have learned the single most valuable lesson of my entire adult life, a lesson paid for in tear-stolen funds and absolute betrayal. When people tell you that you aren't worthy, believe them because they are admitting they don't deserve you. They are freely handing you the absolute truth about their own flawed character, and it is your primary responsibility to listen to their words, pack your bags, and walk away without a single backward glance. You do not have to set yourself on fire simply to keep toxic people warm. You do not have to fund the extravagant lifestyle of individuals who treat your very existence as an embarrassing secret. You have the absolute undeniable right to pack your belongings, freeze your financial accounts, and let the burning building collapse completely to the ground without you standing inside it. If you have ever had to completely cut off toxic family members who viewed you as nothing more than an automated bank account, please drop a comment below and let me know exactly how you found your freedom. I read every single story, and I deeply want to celebrate your hard-won independence right alongside you. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of absolute justice, and tell me where you are watching from right now and what time it is there. I love connecting with viewers from all over the world who share these experiences. Until next time, remember your inherent value, stand fiercely up for your boundaries, and always protect your peace.